dedications to all the soldiers fighting for the Jewish nation and for Israel, that they should be successful in their mission and return back safely unscathed, and rescue the hostages unscathed also. And I've got a name. I've got Yonatan ben Merav, and what's the other one? Damon, what's your nephew's name? So before I think of
Gabriel Svi ben Ilana.
and Eitan Stern and Yishai Stern and Stephen Fisher's son. You know Stephen Fisher from the base, his son, I don't know his name, but he's in a tank unit. And all the other soldiers.
Oh, man, I know.
Okay, so this week, this week's parsha is Parsha Toldot. And one of the things to discuss is that Rivka didn't want Esav to get the blessings from Yitzchak before Yitzchak dies. And earlier, Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov for a bowl of lentil soup because he didn't think the birthright was so important. So Rivka sensed that Esav wouldn't be worthy of the blessings that Yaakov was going to bestow on him, and it would have been more appropriate for Yaakov. And she gave, and Yitzchak, so Yaakov got dressed up in Esav's clothes and he prepared the meal, and Yaakov gave him the blessing, and then Yitzchak comes, and then Esav comes and wasn't given the intended blessing. But the point I wanted to make was that Rivka was vindicated. Towards the end of the parsha, they tell Rivka and Yitzchak instruct Yaakov not to marry women from certain nations, the Hittites and the Canaanites. And Esav actually married one of Ishmael's nieces, and he married a Hittite daughter. So she was vindicated in that he wasn't worthy of the blessing, because those nations are no good for Jews to marry into or to marry with. So some people have intuition and just have a sense of what is going to be good in the big scheme of things, and Rivka was actually vindicated. I just wanted to mention from that aspect.
Okay, interesting. Okay, good. Just a quick summary thus far. So the Mishnah stated that, as you know, yesterday we said that if there was a tax collector and he took your Porsche and then felt a little bad because he wants to see himself as a righteous individual, he gives you a Ford Escort in return. And he's not collecting tax money legitimately, because he's obviously the king would not approve of his practices, nor the amount he charges compared to the paltry amount that he gives the king. Then you can deem the money as stolen. Is every cent stolen? Well, we're not sure. But certainly, if it was taken against your will, it was taken against somebody else's will. But because he took your Porsche instead of a Ford Escort's worth, and he decided to alleviate his conscience by, when you complained, giving you somebody else's Ford Escort, the Mishnah said you can keep it, because all probability, if the victim, another citizen, had his Ford Escort taken, just like you don't think you're going to retrieve your Porsche back, because this tax collector's got a whole lot of armed soldiers that work for him, and the citizen of the Ford Escort probably isn't going to get it back either, and he knows as such. Otherwise, you wouldn't give it in the first place, particularly if you hardly owe that level of taxes. So therefore, the reason you can keep it, according to the Mishnah, is at the point where the victim basically developed despair and gave up on retrieving his Ford Escort. It then belongs to the robber, and as the third party, when it changes to your domain, then it's certainly not such a problem. But at its core, all we are saying is it hasn't entered your domain yet. So then the only factor that's kicking in is Yush, despair. So the Mishnah holds that despair alone suffices for acquisition of the third party, not from the robber. The robber has to, or the legal robber, which is the tax or custom collector, should by all legal purposes pay back what he took from the citizen, but he's not going to do it. So you can keep it on that basis. The Brisa disagrees, because the Brisa basically says it's not sufficient. Despair alone does not affect acquisition, and thus the recipient of the donkey, in this case, of getting an inferior donkey, the superior one you paid in taxes, or inferior Ford Escort Porsche you gave in taxes, means that you don't acquire it. Why? Because it came into your possession illegally. Since Yush, without a combination of one of these three factors, is not sufficient for acquisition. So I wanted to ask Evan, what are those three factors? Any one of those three factors that Yush has to combine with in order to effect acquisition? Third party?
What the Yehosh is that the person despairs that he'll never have found the article ever again. Is that one of them?
Well, no, he despairs of ever being able to get his article back. You write there's despair if he loses his article. You write there's despair if he has his only article stolen from him. But either way, he doesn't feel he's got the strength to get it back. He's not going to have either the legal.
He's given up completely on it.
Yeah. So what does despair have to combine with to effect acquisition for the robber? Meaning that the robber, if he is apprehended, he has to give the cash equivalent, but doesn't have to give the original object back, because that which he stole has to resemble the same state in which it was taken from him. So I'm going to save you guys some time so we can hit new stuff.
No, I know the answer. All
right, tell me, Gav.
I think I'm just a bit whacked, so I won't get all of it, but I'll get most of it. So the answer is change of domain, a sale, if it's slaughtered, all that type of stuff. If it's change of composition as well, if it's an improvement or that type of stuff.
Excellent. So the Mishnah, the Tanna Kamma, the Mishnah holds that Yush alone is effective, and that's why you can keep the inferior item that the tax collector gives you from the original owner. And that basically the Brisa says it's not true that it's effective in and of itself. It has to either have a physical change, money has to change hands, it has to have a change of domain. Any one of those factors suffices. And therefore, that's the reason why the ton of the Brisa says that the Mishnah, whoever obviously wrote the Mishnah, he doesn't concur that despair alone affects acquisition. But anyway, there's a different reason, because Rashi said, and the Rashash, is that it's only out of piety that the recipient should say, because it's what you call repugnant, according to Rashi, that you keep property that does not belong to you. Because even if legally you can keep it, if you never wanted your Porsche taken from you by force, you shouldn't deprive somebody of their Ford Escort that's taken from them by force, because you can rest assured there was no consent, it was stolen. And it wasn't legitimate taxes owed for that level of taxation enforced. So therefore, you should return it to the original owner. We then said that there was a secondary part, and that is if the custom collectors gave him the donkey, or if a group of bandits gave him the garment that's inferior, the reason why they belong to the new citizen who gave his superior item away is because their owners may be assumed to have despaired of retrieving them. And Rav Ashi said, look, the only reason that we can assume a victim of a bandit has despaired of retrieving his property is when the thief was an idolater. whether it's what you call a legal thief, meaning a tax collector. It's still an act of theft if it's taken against your will. It doesn't follow any sort of taxation or structure according to the king's mandate to a T. He loses his agency, the tax collector. So if the bandit was an idolater, you can assume the Jew gave up hope and despaired of retrieving his property. But if the bandit was a Jew, or the tax collector was a Jew, the owner hasn't despaired, because he thinks tomorrow I'm going to take this tax collector to court, because the amount he's collecting doesn't work within the king's stipulated taxation levels. So that's according to Rav Ashi. Rav Yossi objected to it, and he said actually logic dictates the complete opposite, because in the case of idolaters who basically impose the law with force, the owner does not despair of retrieving his stolen property. But in the case of Jews, since they merely talk, he does despair. So according to Rav Yosef, actually less worried about getting the money back from an idolater, because in that case you can take him to a secular court, and the courts do not just issue a verdict of guilty. They actually send sheriffs of the court, which are glorified henchmen with weapons, to go and collect on behalf of the plaintiff from the defendant. So that's a court that takes action, because you must know the majority of the idolaters, and Kevin asked a good question yesterday. He said, well, are they idolaters or are they just non-Jews? And the reason why we use this broad term, idolaters, is if they do not adhere to a moral and ethical code. And Kevin, how do you know? Because they're taking your portion from you. That's how you know, without permission. So therefore, they're put under the classification of idolaters, meaning they're not scared of spiritual retribution for their lack of morality and ethical behavior. And therefore, the courts are secular courts are used to dealing with such individuals. And the only way you can deal with those individuals is with a language they understand, and that is violence and force. And the courts are happy to do so. However, a Jew suing a Jew might have a difficult problem, because the halachic court run by the Beis Din says, okay, you've got a witness against this Jewish tax collector and say he's done wrong, but where's your second witness? Because to convict a Jew, you need two witnesses, 2 against 1. Whereas with a secular court, you need 1 witness against 1 defendant. And therefore, in that particular case, the Jewish person has less of a chance of collection from another Jew in a Beis Din, because they want to exonerate the defendant within the legal structures and previous case studies. So therefore, according to Rav Yosef, the Jew is more likely to feel despair if it was a Jewish tax collector than an idolatrous tax collector. So how do we reconcile these two opinions? Well, Rav Yosef does it on behalf of Rabbi Ashi. And he just says, no. I know you think Rav Ashi is saying the opposite to me, but we can reconcile it because it was stated in reference to the Mishnah's latter ruling that in the case of one who rescues object, either one object that was stolen or many objects from a troop of bandits, or a singular thief or bandit, whether legal or illegal. We said there are many different types of robbers. Those that do it legitimately by being tax collectors or customs collectors, and those that put a gun in your face or break in your house. Either way, they're known as bandits or a bandit singular. So the bottom line is, if you rescue an object from one of these thieves, if the owners have despaired of retrieving them, they are his. So what's the implication, guys, is that if it's known that the owner has despaired for sure, yes, the rescuer can keep the article, okay? But if the owner's intent is unknown, the default position is that the rescuer may not keep it. So the Mishnah rules that we cannot assume despair on the part of the bandit's victim. We can't assume. And an explanation of this ruling, according to Rav Ashi, well, Rav Yosef's explanation of Rav Ashi, they taught that we do not assume despair on the part of the owner only when the bandit was an idolater. We don't assume despair because he can collect it from a non-Jewish court pretty easily, because the courts impose the law with force. But if the bandit was a Jew, since Jewish courts merely talk and they issue verdicts, but they don't send debt collectors, we can assume then that the owner's despaired. So that's Rashi's explanation of Rav Yosef explaining Rav Ashi. Right. Okay, that was fairly straightforward. Now we're going to get to today's daf. Did that summary help you guys, by the way, at all?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Excellent. Shame, because Arthur had a lot of patience with his son yesterday, and he had a lot of patience to look after medically. So,
That is a nice pun.
yeah.
Kevin,
So,
As long as I don't lose my patience.
yeah, I'm trying
Damon?
not to, mate.
Damon, as long as I don't lose my patience.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
son
yeah.
will go
Well, please
away.
God, they
Or
stay
die.
alive. So,
Yeah,
guys, we're going to learn a little
James,
bit of a complicated issue here.
about the idolatry issue, sorry. About the idolaters, for the tax people. Does that include SARS or not?
Yeah, they're the worst of all. There you collect nothing. It's despair that set in immediately. So, guys, we're dealing with a bit of a complicated issue because there's an Amorite debate that's going to occur on the daf, Pam. Leave my own place. All right. Arthur, are you at least hearing me? Is somebody hearing me out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you and we can see what's going on. And we heard you say that you need your own place. We heard that.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
So there's an Amorite debate, guys. And this comes from a different Gemara completely. If you look at kalim, which are vessels, there are parts of kalim that deal with Tumah and Tara. In other words, how do vessels, utensils become infected with spiritual impurity? And how do they stay pure? So in the 26th daf, in the 8th section, I'm assuming that it can't be chapter 28. There's not 28 chapters kalim, Kevin, for sure not. So it's got to be the 26th daf, and it's got to be the 8th verse, because when it's got 26.8, you can say in the Chumash, chapter 26, verse 8, but in the Gemaras, there's not enough chapters. So I'm assuming, Kevin, and it's just, if you want to correct me and let me know, I'm assuming it's on the 26th daf. Okay, so let me just go through this. Is that we're dealing with this issue of Tumah and Tara. So in order for an object, other than a person or a food, to become Tameh through contact with a source of Tumah, it must be classified as a kli, as a utensil. In other words, something that's useful, something that's fashioned into a useful form and designated for use in that form. So again, if you've got a Ava Tumah, a person or food can get infected by direct touch. The only way an object can get infected is if it's a object of usefulness, of utility. So if you take a tree branch and you touch something that's Tumah, you won't get Tumah, because only food and a person can absorb Tumah. That's what you've got to listen to carefully. The only other thing that can absorb Tumah directly is a utensil, or utensils, but it has to have two components to it. It has to already be fashioned into a useful function and form and designated for use in that form. So guys, if we have a raw material that requires processing before it can be used as a utensil, it's not susceptible to Tumah. Okay,
Damon,
it's not-
so what you're saying is that if you got the clay and you touch the raw clay, it doesn't get tumor. But if it's into a vase or something like that, that can get the tumor once it's finished.
yes, you've been listening to Rabbi Cohen.
Yeah, can you know that?
Why is that the exact example?
I thought he
Similar, yeah.
he
Similar,
clarified. I thought he
okay.
meant clay by clay, but Arthur was right.
No, it
Yeah,
doesn't
okay.
matter.
As long, if it's raw clay, it can't get tumor. But if it's made
It
into a
can't be a
clay,
clay.
clay's made into a clay, if you go from clay to clay, you got a problem.
You
Yeah.
know why? I'm guessing, but I'm just trying to be just from like Hashem perspective. It had to be done like this because if the raw product itself attracted tumor, you wouldn't be able to walk on metal or on clay or anything. You wouldn't be able to walk on the ground. You wouldn't be able to move around. So it had to be something that was processed already.
Well, there's a problem, Gav, to your argument, and that is Rabbi Zaltzis gave a share to Kohanim visiting the cemetery. And
Yeah, but
trees, trees
okay.
absorb tumah from other tumah, from corpses, and that's why a Kohen can't stand under a tree, as far as I know.
Correct. But now you also said something that contradicted that. You said that a piece of wood doesn't.
So
Is
what
that because the
what
wood
I'm saying
is
is
that a dead piece? Is that a dead
Because
piece
it's
of wood?
manufactured.
no. So what I'm saying is I actually need to reconcile the difference between Rabbi Zaltz's opinion and the Gemara's opinion, because there has to be a way to reconcile it. But if you have, Gavin, a normal branch, say you've got a tree trunk or a branch of wood that's not attached to the ground, because the tumah could come from the ground and from the roots or be absorbed as part of the environment. I don't know. But if that branch is detached and you touch something with it that has tumah, that branch isn't a kli, a vessel to absorb the tumah, because it's not a kli of useful utility. That for sure is in the stuff. Why a tree can at a cemetery, I don't know. So the bottom line is, if you take that tree and you make it into
I know why, Damon. I got an idea why a tree does that. Because a tree is useful for covering your shade. So just that benefit will make you tumor, because it can be used for something.
It's possible. I mean, let's just speak to Rabbi Zaltzis.
I'm thinking because you said if it's useful, that you said if it's useful and you can use it, that might carry the tumor. But I'm just trying to figure out why a tree. Well, I mean, anyway, you're a researcher. That's your job.
I have an idea, maybe.
Okay, go, Kevin. But I was at
after
that
you, Gavin, you were first.
Well, Arthur's got a good idea in terms of utility of shade, but what's your idea, Kev?
Okay, so if a tree
go ahead,
is it fully, if there are leaves and it creates shade, it might seem like a structure. So maybe that's why it could be makabel tumah, whereas usually only something like that's manufactured, like a piece of wood or furniture, that can makabel tumah. Maybe that's why a tree, if it's fully grown or if it's had branches and everything, maybe that's why it's an exception.
A good point too.
What was your point, Gavin?
I want to add something. I'm just trying to remember. Sorry, I'm not feeling great today. I didn't have any sleep at all actually last night. I took a vitamin B complex at about 5:30 at night. The injection is not a good idea. I must do it in the morning because it makes you very hyperactive. Just bottom line, I went to that Rabbi Zaltz's show, and I think I can't remember if the tree becomes tumah or if the tree, because it's got a covering, kind of like what Kevin's saying. It creates like a structure and it traps the tumah.
Arthur said it creates shade. It has utility.
No, he said it creates shade. I'm not talking about shade. No, he was saying that for a different reason. I'm talking about it, the fact, not that it creates shade.
It's like a structure.
It actually traps the tumah, so the tumah can't escape. It gets caught underneath the tree. I'm not sure if the tree actually, because you can't touch that tree. That tree's high up. So why can't I walk underneath? I'm not touching that tree. The tumah is trapped underneath all the way from the ground, all the way up that tree for some reason. We need to obviously have it.
No, I've got it. I've got it.
A useful.
I've got it. I've just looked it up. It says there's 3 ways tumah can be transferred from a tumah mace, a dead body. Now, there's different levels of tumah. So there's a sheretz, there's different levels compared to a human body. So that's a big deal if it's ava tumah with a tumah mace. But one of the ways is touching, which is maga. The other one is masa, which is carrying or moving. Even if you don't touch the remains of the body directly, but you touch it within clothing and you move the body around. And the third one is being under the same roof, an ohel. So Kohen is prohibited from becoming tamei mace by any of those methods. Therefore, he can't touch, move, or be in the same ohel as human remains. One of the reasons is an ohel is not just a tent, it means a roof. It has a much broader connotation, okay? So it's anything that almost covers or overhangs. It's a tefach wide, okay? And it could be an umbrella, a branch. It's almost like a tree that it creates an umbrella sort of setting where the tumah can't escape, and Gavin hit on it. In other words, tumah oil spreads from one oil area to another that overlaps or connects. Even a very different roof heights, exactly as Gavin suggested. So tree branches, umbrellas, caves, ledges, roofs, they can create a continual oil of great distances. So Gavin, if the tombstone is far away, but there's a succession of trees, they can travel from one to another. It's still seen as one ohel, even though they're separate trees. It traps it in. Same in hospitals, museums, shopping malls. So Gavin, you hit on the right answer. So now that we've got clarity on that, let's just go and understand this stuff. So the principle of this stuff, and we learned it in the 66 stuff of Bava Kamma. So Kevin, this is it, is that in order for tumah to in order for a utensil, a kli, to get tumah, it has to be a useful object, and it has to be already completed in that form. So a raw material that requires further processing before it can be used as a utensil is not susceptible to tumah. That's a very important concept. So if I've got a tree branch and I was going to make a wooden ladle, a spoon, and I hadn't finished making the spoon, and it touches a tumah-infected object, it doesn't transfer to that utensil because it's not a utensil, not processed. Okay? So there is one thing I wanted to let you guys know. There's certain things that are already processed even in its state. So say, for example, I've got an animal hide. Okay? And Kevin, I turn around and I say to you that my intent is to make this animal hide into a mat, a placemat where I could eat and rest my food on, or a walking mat. There's no further manufacturing that I need to do to that piece of hide, because if you throw it on the ground and you call it a mat, it's a mat. If you use it as a tablecloth, it's a tablecloth. If, however, I take that piece of leather and I say I want to turn it into shoes, and I have to create a frame and shrink the leather and build it into a shape, that requires further processing. So therefore, that raw leather hide cannot contract tumah. But if there's no further processing and I declare in my mind what it is as a useful finished product, even though there's no further manufacturing process, at that point my mere thought can create it into a utensil, and therefore if it gets infected with tumah, it has that susceptibility. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
So how does this affect things? Well, we're going to see if it's stolen by a thief or abandoned, etc. what the story is. So I'm going to explain it now. Okay, I think this will help as long as you understand the concept. So we learned in this Mishnah in Kalim, in the case of the heart of a householder, thought renders them susceptible to Tumah. Meaning, I buy a piece of leather and I want to, for my home, create a placemat. It doesn't require any further cutting or stitching. And therefore I say this is going to be a placemat, or I think it's going to be a placemat. And then I accidentally drop that piece of leather into a container that's got a dead lizard. Well, then it's a problem. I can't use that mat anymore because it's infected with spiritual impurity, because it was touched by a dead animal, or sherrits or whatever, dead lizard. Now, that only is the case with the heart of a householder. But we thought renders them susceptible to Tumah, but the heart of a tanner, thought does not render them susceptible to Tumah. Now, I just want to explain to you why. I have leather hearts, and I've got a little factory in the back. And I decided I'm thinking of having this as a mat and sell it to a client. Now, Gavin gives me a lesson in 101 business and says, Damon, you're a moron. If you turn this, and Arthur's telling me I'm a moron too, because they're saying to me, look, if you turn this into a mat, then you've limited the amount of sales you can do, because the next person that comes in the shop might want shoes, at which case you've already kept it as a mat. Rather don't designate what you want this leather to be, because the customer is going to dictate how he wants that leather used. And if you listen to the customer's needs, who might want that leather further processed into a lady's shoes, then you've gotten yourself a sale. If you tell the customer what they want, you have to then be very lucky that the customer wants what you are telling them the object will be. Does that make sense? Guys?
Yeah,
Say that again,
yeah.
please, Damon. Say that last statement again.
You're shouting. No, but that's kind of annoying. No problem. All right. Thanks. All right. So, so what I'm saying is as follows, is that the needs of the householder can dictate the final end user product. I bought a piece of leather, Kevin. I can say in my head, I want it to be a mat. And then if I accidentally drop it into a container that has Tumah, that mat becomes infected with Tumah, because it's my house. I can choose what I want that piece of leather to become by thought. If I've got a leather shop and I can't, as the tanner or as the business owner, state unequivocally what that leather is going to end up being processed for. Why? Very simple, because the customer will tell me what he wants that leather for. If I'm a tanner, he might say he wants his wife to have a pair of leather shoes, or he might say he wants a mat. But I can't dictate as a shop owner, because then I won't sell any objects. So therefore, even in my mind, as the owner of the shop or a tanner, if I say I want that object to be a mat, and the next customer that comes in says he wants that leather to be made into shoes, I, as the owner of the shop, of the tannery shop, cannot dictate with my thought process what that object will become. So therefore, even if it's in a state of readiness as a piece of leather, and I say in my head it's a mat, it's meaningless, and it wouldn't contract Tumah if I dropped it into a container of Tumah, because the client would turn around and say, Damon, I want shoes for my wife. Take that piece of leather and fashion them into shoes. Therefore, the owner of the shop or tannery cannot dictate by thought what that object will become, the raw material, and therefore he can't make that object in his head by mere thought, and therefore it's not susceptible to Tumah if it falls in a vat containing a dead sheretz. because the customer dictates. It's not the homeowner. Kevin, can you give that concept back to me? Kev, I can't hear you.
No.
I can give it back to you. I can give it back to you.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, quite simply, if you're a regular guy, you decide that's going to be a carpet. It's a piece of leather that looks like a carpet. You want a carpet and you do it. A piece of sheriff falls in it. It becomes Tumah straight away. Okay. But if you're a guy who manufactures stuff, okay, and let's say you thought you could think it could be a carpet, it could be a pair of shoes, but you haven't given it a definite thing, okay, and sheriff lands in it, it's not Tumah. Because you don't know what your customer wants. You may want a car, pair of shoes, a jacket. That's basically the concept.
Excellent, Arthur. Thank God for Bava Kamma.
Yeah, no, spot on. Actually, exactly what Damon said. Well done. Can I just ask you something, Damon, quickly? When you talk about a sheret, how is it all animals that carry tumah and insects as well?
Not every animal. I must tell you something, that sherets has the different categories. Sherets, as far as I know, is a lizard and a rat, and there's one or two. It's not every category. It's not every category. It's actually very, very complicated. Rav Simcha said one of the most complicated Gemaras, and so did Rabbi Cohen, are those issues dealing with Tara and Tumah. They're very abstract ethereal concepts. I don't know the extent of it, but let's just say you've got dead sherets, which is within the category of what would become tameh, impure, and then your object fell in, and that